The Young and the Restless spoilers shock. In Genoa City, nothing ever remains untouched by jealousy, manipulation, and hidden agendas, and the fragile hope of happiness often finds itself crushed beneath the weight of ambition and resentment. Claire believed that she had finally secured her place, not just in Carl's heart, but also in his future, when she discovered that she was pregnant. For her, this child was not only a symbol of love but also of redemption, a new beginning after a life filled with suspicion and doubt from those who never quite believed in her sincerity. Kyle, who had long carried the burden of fractured relationships and half-kept promises, embraced the news with a joy he had not known in years. Though he had been a father to Harrison, his bond with that child was complicated, colored by Summer's sacrifices and his own emotional distance. Summer, weary and alone in her struggle, carried the responsibilities that Kyle often abandoned, and her heart ached to see Kyle now brimming with excitement for a child that was not hers. For Kyle, this moment with Claire was the first time he felt like he had a chance to be the kind of father he always wanted to be. But destiny had other plans, for in the shadows, jealousy was already sharpening its claws. Audra, who had never accepted Claire's presence or her relationship with Kyle, saw the pregnancy not as a joyous event but as a threat. To Audra, Claire's claim of motherhood was nothing but another weapon to solidify her hold on Kyle and his family's empire. She refused to allow Claire to win, not when she herself had invested so much effort in weaving her own path toward power and security. Every smile on Kyle's lips, every soft glance he gave to Claire, only fueled Audra's fury. Her thoughts turned darker by the day, and when Holden entered the picture with his own wounds and insecurities, their paths collided in dangerous ways. Holden, tormented by the knowledge that the child Claire carried was not his, allowed his envy to grow unchecked. His pride could not accept the idea of Kyle raising a child with Claire while he remained in the shadows. His role diminished to nothing but a spectator in the woman's future. Together, Holden and Audra found common ground in their bitterness, their whispered conversations circling around one cruel plan to rob Claire of the one thing that bound her to Kyle, to ensure that this child would never be born. The tragedy unfolded slowly, almost like a nightmare creeping into reality. Claire, radiant in her anticipation, began to notice the tension in the air, though she could not fully place its origin. Kyle, consumed by his own joy, remained blind to the dangers circling them. For once in his life, he was ready to stand tall as a protector, a father, a partner, yet his inattention to the storm brewing around them would prove costly. Summer watched from afar, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Though she had once loved Kyle deeply, she could not ignore the irony of the situation, how he, who had left her to shoulder Harrison's burdens alone. The bitterness gnawed at her, though even she could not have predicted the horror that was to come. It happened in a moment that would scar everyone involved. Audra, calculating and cold, saw her chance when Claire, vulnerable and alone, crossed her path. Words were exchanged, sharp and filled with venom, and then the act itself, swift and irreversible, was shove, a fall, the sickening silence that followed. Claire's cry for help echoed too late, her body crumpled by the force of betrayal, her dream of motherhood shattered in an instant. When Kyle arrived, it was not to the sound of laughter or the gentle promises of their future, but to the devastating truth that the life he had begun to cherish was gone. No evidence could erase the reality. Audra had succeeded, and Claire had miscarried. The aftermath was even darker than the act itself. Grief consumed Claire, twisting her love for Kyle into despair. Every memory of his joy now became a knife, reminding her of what had been stolen. Kyle, crushed beneath the weight of guilt and helplessness, searched for answers that would never be found. He blamed himself for not seeing the danger, for not protecting her, and unspoken truth hung between them like poison. This loss would forever change them. What once felt like destiny now became a chasm too wide to cross. Their love, once bright, began to dim under the shadows of mistrust and pain, and whispers spread through Genoa City of a couple doomed by the cruelty of fate. Yet the greatest tragedy lay in what this event foreshadowed. The miscarriage was not just the end of a pregnancy, it was the beginning of a spiral that would pull Kyle and Claire apart, each step leading them deeper into isolation. Claire, unable to bear the thought of standing by the man who could not shield her from betrayal, began to withdraw, her heart turning cold even toward the one she once trusted. Kyle, desperate to hold on, only tightened his grip, pushing her further away. The Dupree and Abbott circles watched in silence, some with pity, others with satisfaction, as another love story in Genoa City collapsed beneath the relentless tide of ambition and deceit. Holden, though plagued with guilt, found himself entangled even further in Audra's schemes, bound to her by the shared blood of their crime. And Audra, far from remorseful, carried herself with renewed determination, her heart hardened by the belief that she had eliminated her rival. The future, once full of promise, now stretched out as a road paved with broken trust and unspoken bitterness. What had begun as the hope of new life had turned into the root of destruction, and as the days passed, it became clear that Clare and Claire's relationship could not withstand the storm. Love in Genoa City had always been fragile, but this time it was crushed entirely, leaving nothing but ashes in its place. The tragedy of the unborn child became not just a loss for two people but a wound that would bleed into every corner of their lives, shaping choices, alliances, and betrayals yet to come. In Genoa City, joy and tragedy have always walked hand in hand, and no story illustrates this cruel dance better than the unraveling tale of Kyle, Clare, Audra, Holden, and the far-reaching hand of Victor Newman. For a brief, fragile moment, Kyle believed he had finally found happiness. Claire's announcement of her pregnancy filled him with a joy he had not experienced in years, a joy he had denied himself even in the presence of his son, Harrison. That child, though loved, had always been a complicated responsibility, shadowed by Kyle's absence and Summer's silent sacrifice. Summer had borne the brunt of raising Harrison alone, carrying the duties that Kyle abandoned in his cycles of indecision and selfishness. Now, watching Kyle radiant with anticipation at the prospect of a new child with Clare, Summer felt a bitter irony seeping into her heart. For Kyle, this unborn baby represented redemption, a chance to finally be the father he had failed to be before. And Clare clung to the hope that the child would secure her place not just beside Kyle, but in the web of Genoa City's most powerful families. Yet happiness in this city is always fleeting, for behind every smile there is a whisper, behind every embrace there is a dagger waiting to strike. Audra could not accept Clare's pregnancy, not as a blessing, not as a victory, but as a threat. To her, Clare's belly was not the beginning of life but the end of her own ambitions. For months she had fought to claim her piece of Kyle's world, to secure influence, wealth, and power through him, and now, with Clare's unborn child, she saw everything slipping away. Rage consumed her, and when Holden stepped into her path, wounded and envious, their bitterness fused into a weapon. Holden, eaten alive by jealousy, could not tolerate the idea that the woman he desired would tie herself forever to Kyle through motherhood. His envy over not being the father was as sharp as a blade, cutting into his pride every time he saw Kyle's hand resting protectively on Clare's stomach. The two, bound by their resentment, whispered in shadows until their plan was formed. They would not let Clare bring this child into the world. They would not allow her to secure her future in Kyle's arms. Their scheme was as simple as it was sinister: cause a miscarriage and destroy the bond that united Kyle and Clare. The act itself was as brutal as it was cowardly. Clare, unaware of the danger, crossed paths with Audra in a moment that should have been unremarkable. There were words, bitter and laced with venom, then a sudden shove, a fall, the silence of horror. Clare's cry echoed, but it was too late. The pregnancy ended there, in an instant of violence that stripped her of motherhood and Kyle of fatherhood. For Clare, it was not just the loss of a child but the shattering of a dream, the cruel reminder that love in Genoa City is always fragile. When Kyle discovered what had happened, the devastation carved through him like fire. For the first time in his life, he was prepared to be strong, to be present, to embrace the role of protector. Now, instead of holding his child, he held Clare's broken body and empty heart. The tragedy should have ended there, but whispers began to spread, darker than the act itself. Some believed that Audra had not acted alone, that behind her shove was the guiding hand of someone far more powerful. Victor Newman, the patriarch who had long sought to dismantle any union he disapproved of, emerged as the silent suspect. Victor had always been ruthless in protecting his empire, using manipulation, betrayal, and even violence to bend others to his will. Clare, in his eyes, had been a constant thorn, her presence beside Kyle a threat to the stability of the Newman dynasty. A child would tie her forever to the family, granting her influence Victor could not tolerate. Did he whisper into Audra's ear, Did he give her the nod to do what he could not be seen doing himself? The thought was monstrous, unthinkable even for Victor, but in Genoa City, nothing is beyond the realm of possibility. Victoria, already estranged from her father, seized on the rumors with fury. Their relationship had been battered for years by betrayal and power struggles, but this tragedy widened the chasm into something unbridgeable. To Victoria, the idea that her father might have sacrificed his own grandchild to achieve control was unforgivable. If proven true, it would not just be another scar on their relationship but a final severing of ties. Victor's enemies and allies alike began to murmur. His empire had survived boardroom battles, hostile takeovers, and family betrayals, but the suspicion of complicity in the death of an unborn child was different. It was not business as usual. It was an act so vile that no amount of power could wash it clean. If exposed, it would be the end of him. Kaya, shattered by grief, discovered the truth of Audra's actions, and his rage erupted in a way few had ever seen. No amount of restraint could hold back the fury of a father robbed of his child. His hand struck Audra across the face, the sound a thunderclap that reverberated through Genoa City's gossip channels. It was not an act of dominance but of breaking, of a man who had lost everything lashing out at the person who had destroyed his life. Audra, once confident and calculating, found herself cornered, her power crumbling under the weight of exposure. The police, unable to ignore the evidence, launched an investigation. For once, Audra's manipulations could not save her. The city no longer saw her as clever or ambitious but as a criminal, a woman who had crossed the line between ruthless and monstrous. The trial that loomed threatened to expose not only Audra's crime but the possibility of Victor's involvement. Audra, desperate to save herself, began dropping hints, casting shadows of suspicion without ever saying his name outright. Her veiled accusations fanned the flames of speculation, forcing Victor into a spotlight he never intended to occupy. Victoria pressed harder, demanding answers, her rage a storm he could no longer control. Within the Newman family, divisions widened. Loyalty that had once seemed unshakable began to crumble under the weight of doubt. The idea that Victor would sanction such an act against his own blood was too much for many to stomach, and the empire he had built with iron control began to show cracks. Meanwhile, Clare withdrew into silence, her grief isolating her from Kyle. Even though he had fought for her, even though he had brought the truth into the light, the bond between them had been scarred beyond repair. Every moment reminded her of what had been stolen, and every look from Kyle became a reminder of the child they would never hold. The love that once seemed unbreakable withered under the pressure of pain, and soon their relationship began to collapse. What began as the promise of a family ended as a chasm of mistrust and sorrow. Kyle clung to her desperately, but his grip only pushed her further away. Holden, though riddled with guilt, found himself chained to Audra's fate. His role in the conspiracy tied him to her forever, whether he wanted it or not. Each day drew him deeper into her darkness, and though he despised himself for it, he could not escape without exposing his own sins. In trying to destroy Claire's future, he had destroyed his own, and Genoa City would never forget. The miscarriage was more than a personal tragedy. It was a seismic shift that rippled through every corner of the city's elite. Audra's imprisonment, Victor's possible downfall, Clare and Kyle's shattered bond, Victoria's fury, Holden's guilt, all of it wove together into a tapestry of ruin. What had begun as the simple joy of an unborn child had ended in betrayal, scandal, and destruction. The echoes of that single shove, that single cruel moment, would shape the future of Genoa City for years to come.